This is a very parable-centered gospel reading. But I want to talk a little bit about the very unique and powerful kind of leader that Jesus of Nazareth was. To start, I'd like to start telling a little story on myself. I have spent most of my adult life as a college swimming coach. I'm the head swimming and diving coach at Lemoyne College in Syracuse. And there was a time, not so long ago, in fact I was beginning formation to be a priest, and I'm embarrassed to tell you this story, but I'm going to tell you anyway. There was one meet in January. It was after our training trip, and swim teams from up north, where it's miserable in January, often go to a warm place to train for part of December and January, and we did. And we got in the best shape we were in, ever. We were swimming incredibly well. And so we got back from the training trip, and our first meet after that training trip, very first meet, we laid down and gave up. We lost to a team that we should have beaten easily. They looked listless, distracted. Now, as a leader of young men and women, there were issues to address pertaining to this performance. And I had to figure out a way to address them. And there are a couple of different extremes here. I could react with anger and punish them. Make them do sprints until they were ready to drop dead. Kind of like that scene from Miracle on Ice, where the hockey coach has to go back and forth the whole time until somebody tells him what he wants to hear. I could have threatened them with taking away their scholarship money. Not that I gave them that much to begin with, but I could have. I could have shamed them and humiliated them. I could have done a lot of things. Or I could have called them together in a group and told them a story. I could have told them a parable about a school of fish who were given a great gift by their Creator. The gift was to swim fast, faster than any other school of fish in the ocean. But some of the fish in that school were lazy. They didn't take their gift seriously. And while they were carrying on playing silly fish games, whatever those are, a lesser school of fish came along and outswam them for the best food. And that supposedly lesser school of fish became the greatest school of fish in the sea, replacing the school of fish that should have been. They got to swim in the clean, deep water, and they went to the Fish Olympics, while the lazy school of fish got caught in a net. And they didn't make it to the deep water Fish Olympics because they were caught in a net, processed, frozen, and sold in a box labeled Gordon's. That would be perhaps a little closer to what Jesus would have done. Oh. Or you could do what I did. Because it was January and the cafeteria was closed, the parents of the swim team, who were unaware just how bad their male and female children swam that day, had purchased a sandwich platter with all these deli meats on it. Salami, bologna, ham, turkey, all that kind of stuff. And one of the parents, so innocently, and I felt so bad about it later, asked me, "What did you think about the meat, Coach?" And I said, "I'll tell you what I think." And I put my hand under the platter and just launched it right into the deep end of the pool. "That's what I think." And I stormed off. Okay, that wasn't the best thing. I did find out something, though. I found out that after about 10 minutes in chlorinated water, all cold cuts are the same color. The texture might vary slightly, but all cold cuts are the same color. And I did, feeling bad, help clean up. Now, the reason I start with a story like that, with two different extremes, is because the people in the place and the time of Jesus of Nazareth would have expected a reaction to failure, to falling short, much more similar to the first example I gave you: anger, humiliation, shame. That was very common in those days. And see, back in those days, almost everybody was poor. Almost everybody was dirt poor and lived basically meal to meal. The equivalent, even worse, than check to check nowadays. And just that mission they had every day to feed their family and stave off starvation made their lives so practically oriented they didn't have time to sit around and form discussion groups over anything. And then they were also ruled by the Jewish leadership. I don't know if you know this exact number. I only know it because I looked it up, but there were 613 different rules and regulations required to be a faithful Jew in those times. And they were all Jewish people that we're talking about here. Rules about what to eat, how to eat it, when to eat it, when you could marry, when you could go to work, when you could go to sleep, what to sacrifice at the temple, when to do it, how often to pray, just everything you can possibly imagine. They spent so much time worrying about rules and regulations, just didn't have time to think. And then there were the Romans, the occupiers. You had to stay on their good side, or you could end up imprisoned, tortured, or worse. So it was a people and a time that were thinking more about survival, just to feed your family, to be a faithful Jew, and to stay out of trouble. And then Jesus comes along, and he changes everything. It's not strict, dictatorial, didactic, rules-making. He is such a powerful and charismatic leader, even in a time in history when it's very, very difficult to find time to listen to a storyteller, to think about what a storyteller has to say. Jesus got people to do that. So yeah, the people Jesus spoke to and spoke for were people accustomed to obeying rules, lots of rules with lots of consequences. And they had leaders back then. They were strong, but they were often distant. They were frequently cruel and greedy. They were interested in power. And most people, to them, just existed to serve. So yes, Jesus was a completely new kind of leader. That new kind of leader made leadership look different. Jesus wanted to succeed. He had no problem with winning, but he had no intention of destroying his opponent. He would present challenges to people, but only to help them improve, to become more faithful. It was okay to be proud of who you were and what you were, but never, never did Jesus preach arrogance. He wanted people to be honest, but not cruel. He wanted people to be tough, but also fair-minded, and establishing rules for the greater good of all. And he always, 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 when he confronted people, allowed them to maintain their dignity. He did not preach derision of somebody who disagreed with you. And always, when people make mistakes, and this was really different for these first century Jews, if you made a mistake, there was always hope for redemption, not punishment, not always punishment. It's a kind of strong leadership that instead of being apart from God, it was strong leadership with God at the center. And you can tell the difference. To this day, you can tell the difference. He treated everybody as a human being and not an object. And he honored creation. He honored his fellow human beings, because he was divine but also fully human. He honored their intellect, what makes us unique, by teaching. One reason he spoke in parables, he was honoring all of our God-given intellect by teaching, by being patient with us. Because parables, like the ones we have read today, invite contemplation. They invite understanding. You can come to your own conclusions, and they stay with you. When you think something through for yourself, it stays with you.
They don't always tell you the answer, so you have to keep trying. Parables are kind of a way of stringing us along down the road of faith, always trying to keep up, always trying to understand the situations we're in. All the time, every day. Another way to look at it is to say that you can follow a rule blindly, without thinking, but parables lead to understanding, and they become lodged in our minds and hearts. So in our readings today, we find out what leadership that points to God looks like, what it can do, while at the same time moving beyond blind obedience. It's an invitation to our hearts and minds. You look at the poetry of Ezekiel in our Old Testament reading. God can make things flourish where we don't think it's possible. He can provide a shelter for everyone where we don't think it's possible. Very similar to the Gospel of Mark. Taking something from the smallest seed, making it a mighty tree with room for all the birds in the air, and the creatures under the sea, and everything that walks and crawls on land. There's room for everyone in God's mighty tree. And it starts from the smallest of seeds. Somewhere along the line, whether it's at home or at work or at play or here at church, anywhere we go, all of us take on leadership rules. And yes, somewhere along the line, you have to follow rules and regulations. They're unavoidable. You should go to a swim practice sometime to see what rules and regulations look like. And sometimes we're going to show emotion, and sometimes that emotion is going to look harsh. But if our leadership points toward God, always so important, but especially as we emerge from the pandemic, then along with the rules and the regulations and the emotions and the wet cold cuts, the places and people we serve with that kind of leadership, the leadership that points to God, will flourish. They will flourish. And people will be welcome to join because you invited them. We invited them. All of us invited them to join us in heart and spirit and mind. Amen.